Hello and welcome to this video for today, whether you're here for the first time or you're returning. Hope you will enjoy. Alright guys, here we go. We're getting into our Modern Horizons 2 set videos, and this one is the third one in the series, and this series is now 4 parts long because there's so many cards to talk about, and I decided that I needed to split these videos up a little bit more. But now we're talking about green cards and land cards in this video. You know, I think there's a lot of cool green cards. You know, some of the cards that we've been talking about, they're not, you know, the greatest and the most busted and the most powerful or whatnot. But if you find yourself finding space for some of these cards in some of your, you know, decks and whatnot, I'm certainly going to find space for some of these cards in my deck, especially some of the Squirrel cards, as I always say, you know, and whatnot. I really love that deck, and I really love the jankiness of that deck, and I know people love their janky decks and whatnot, but again, you can still find some place for some of these great cards, especially some of the commons and uncommons. They're surprisingly good. Anyway, we should get right on into our actual cards here for today. As I said, there's always heaps of cards that we need to get into talking about, so we better get right into it. First one is Chitter Spitter, a 3-mana artifact, 2 and a green. At the beginning of your upkeep, you may sacrifice a token. If you do, you can put an acorn counter on Chitter Spitter, and squirrels you control get +1/+1 for each acorn counter on Chitter Spitter. You can pay 1, tap it, create a 1/1 green squirrel creature token. So, of course, this is going in my squirrel deck. You know, it's a cheap sort of token maker to a degree. Yeah, it's 4 mana to make 1. So it's not actually that cheap, you know, and you've got to, you know, tap it and whatnot, all this sort of stuff. But when you've got Parallel Lives Doubling Season and your own Squirrel Parallel Lives, essentially, you start making a few tokens and it starts becoming quite worth it. Of course, it's more push towards Squirrel Tribal, and that's where I really like it, because again, it gives your squirrels +1/+1. You really want those buffs to make your squirrels actually, you know, some sort of a threat. So you need these things that help your squirrels out and whatnot, so that you can actually get going with what you're actually trying to do. You know, I don't think it does much anywhere else. You know, like, it can make a token, but unless you're really heavy into tokens and you really want to buff up the few squirrels that you can maybe make with this, you can only make 1 per turn unless you've got ways to tap it. I just don't think it's that worth it. Yeah, sure, it's funny and it's cool and I really love it, but again, it's not that powerful, but it does do some powerful things if you've got the right sort of synergies around it. Next one up, Gears Will, or Gears Will, I'm not sure. Suspend for 4 and you pay a green. So you got to wait 4 turns for this Yawgmoth's Will, essentially. Until end of turn, you may play lands and cast spells from your graveyard. If a card would be put in your graveyard from anywhere this turn, exile it instead. So very powerful effect, but again, it only goes in certain decks because you got to suspend it for 4 turns and then wait for it to come off suspend. So you've really got to cheat this spell into play and be able to get its effects off immediately to be, you know, decently good to combo off or to do whatever you're going to do with it. It's a nice sort of reanimation spell to a degree to get a few of your things back and whatnot, but I just don't think it's that good. But again, in certain decks, it can be really, really good. It can be the finisher for those decks. Next one, Sanctum Weaver. This is a limited card, but I think it's a really good card. 2 mana, 1 and a green, 0/2. Enchantment creature. You tap it for X mana where X, or 1 color where X is the number of enchantments you control. It goes in an enchantment deck, but it is really good in those enchantment decks. it's an enchantment itself, so it triggers all your enchantresses. So that's really good. Like, again, it is a Serra's Sanctum on a stick, and Serra's Sanctum is a banned card. So that is there, and again, that is a really powerful effect. So if you're in Enchantress, I would definitely consider running it in those decks. Like, it triggers a lot of the other things that you have in those decks when you play an enchantment and whatnot. It counts for itself, so it at least will tap for one without any other support. So it's good, all right early, and you'll certainly draw cards off it later. Next one up, a Verdant Command, a 2-mana instant, 1 and a green. Choose 2. Target player creates 2 tapped 1/1 squirrel creature tokens. Counter target loyalty ability of a planeswalker. That's a weird one. Exile target card from a graveyard, and target player gains 3 life. It's unfortunate you can't choose the same one twice, but whatever. Sometimes there's going to be a creature in a graveyard you want to exile. The flexibility on this is what makes it. Like, the counter activated ability of a planeswalker, that's probably pretty small, but if it's a game-winning ultimate or whatnot, whatever, you might just want to counter it if you actually happen to have this in hand. Just the gaining 3 life is maybe the best other option if nothing else is happening. It's just a very medium option. Like, the 2 squirrels is the best thing, again, from this thing. And then just whatever else you get is just gravy, in a sense, because, like, 2 mana for 2 squirrels and something additional is just pretty good. So I would certainly think that this is mainly a squirrel deck card, and that's why I like it again. But it is fairly flexible in doing some things, but again, most of those things aren't that amazingly good. Yes, exiling a creature from a graveyard, maybe that comes up once every now and again, and maybe that is a game-winning thing sometimes. So again, don't just like, oh, that'll never do anything. Sometimes it will do something, and sometimes it will be worth doing, but again, it's just situational. That's the thing. But anyway, I still think it can see play in certain decks, especially if you're Squirrel Tribal, like I am. But again, it's still got some flexibility, and I would consider it maybe in a token deck as well. Next up, Foundation Breaker. It's 3 and a green for a 2/2, but it's not actually really. When it enters the battlefield, you may destroy target artifact or enchantment, and it has evoke for 1 and a green. So it's basically a Rexage, but it has evoke, and you pay 2 mana for this. Look, I think this is much better than Rexage in a lot of decks. A lot of decks. And probably almost every deck. There isn't that many decks, unless you're actually like Elf Tribal, that I don't think that this is just strictly better than Rexage. Because 1 less mana, sure, that's, that might not seem that much, but it actually is quite a bit. It gets into your graveyard straight away, unless you're in a Flicker deck and you can take advantage of this, or you're in a graveyard deck where you can take advantage of this. That's not that important. But again, that 1 extra mana, even though that doesn't sound like much, for a sorcery speed spell, and that's the problem with this card, and with all of these cards, and with Rexage in general, is that's why I don't like Rexage. It's a sorcery speed answer. I don't like sorcery speed answers. If I want to play a sorcery speed answer, it's got to be super duper efficient and low to the ground so that I can, play other spells during my turn. Yes, sure, Rexage is only 3 mana. That doesn't seem like a lot again, but that 1 extra mana might mean that I can't cast another 3-drop or another 4-drop or another 5-drop or whatever on my turn. The fact that this is 2 mana helps that out quite a bit, I think. So if you're in any deck that's not literally Elf Tribal or absolutely needs Rexage for very, 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 very extremely specific reasons, Perhaps in Marin or specific other decks where you want more things that are that sort of, it enters, it destroys the thing, and I don't care that it's sorcery because I absolutely 100% need the creature, then I would consider maybe running both potentially. But again, just like this replaces that card like 100% of the time to me. Like, maybe I would actually think about running this in some decks, not in all decks, but in some decks where I might want it or can take advantage of it, because, again, it evoking, if I have a Marin, it will immediately get rid of itself, go to the graveyard where I can recur it later, and will give me an experience with Marin. So, again, it's just very good in that sort of deck. Same with Carador, same with, all these other decks, Muldrotha, whatnot. All these decks want cards exactly like this, and I just think this is way better than Rexage in almost every deck that it exists, because, again, that one less mana, you can just, leave up more mana on your turn for more spells that you actually want to play. You don't want to play this bad sorcery removal unless you 100% have to, and if you want to play this, removal, you want it to be as cheap as possible so that you can use the rest of your mana for the actual plays that are actually, you want to play. So, again, this is just a lot better in my opinion, and I think a lot of people should consider running it. Next one, Scurry Oak, 3 mana, 2 and a green, a tree folk. It has evolved. It's a 2/1. Whenever one or more counters are put on Scurry Oak, you create a 1/1 green squirrel creature token. So there's some combos that you can do with this. That's mainly the reason it's here to a degree, but it's also just a squirrel card because I love me some squirrels, and I love me this card because it makes some squirrels. There are some combos, as I said, with it. I don't think I'm going to be able to pull those specific combos off. But again, it's just a good card if you ever find things that, trigger its evolve. You just get a free squirrel. So that's worthwhile to me in my squirrel deck because I really want anything that helps me make more squirrels because it's light on having things that actually do that to a degree. Because there's only so many real squirrels that exist and things that actually make squirrels. There's only so much you can do in the squirrel deck until you run out of stuff. So you need things like this. Again, if you're in a token deck and you can find ways to combo off with it, I would certainly think about it. Again, there are certain things that you can do with it so that you can just keep making squirrels, and keep making counters even to keep making squirrels and whatnot. So certainly, I would certainly consider it. Depends what deck you're in. I would want to be in a go wide deck, and I love some go wide decks. So that's the sort of deck that I would want to go in if you're in a token deck, possibly because you can just create infinite squirrels and then just kill people with your army of squirrels, or sack all your squirrels to kill people or whatnot, things like that. All sorts of things you can do. Squirrel Sanctuary is the next one. 1 mana enchantment. ETBs, you make a 1/1 squirrel. Whenever a non-token creature you control dies, you may pay 1. If you do, return the Sanctuary to your hand. So, there's some sacrifice synergies that you can do with this, obviously. It is 2 mana to basically repay, but there are really good synergies that you can do with this in a sacrifice deck as well. Not just that it's a Squirrel Tribal card, but it's a Squirrel Tribal card, so I just wanted to talk about it quickly. Squirrel Sovereign, same thing to a degree. It's a Squirrel card. Love me some squirrels if you hadn't noticed. But again, Squirrels get +1/+1, 2 mana creature. Just pretty good. If you're Squirrel Tribal, you want it. But again, this is a me sort of thing, and I think I will potentially look at it in some decks, especially if you want to make a lot of squirrels, if you want to go down the route of making infinite squirrels. Maybe it's worth it. Terramorph, next one. Sorcery for 4. You search your library for a basic land card, put it into the battlefield, then shuffle. It also has rebound, so you basically cast it a second time from your graveyard without paying its mana costs. next turn. So look, the land comes in untapped, which is pretty good, and you get 2 of these. Look, explosive veggies, this is basically another explosive veggies. It's 4 mana to get 2 lands, but those lands in this case are untapped, which is important because you want your lands to be untapped, and you basically get the second one at slow speed or whatever. I don't know. It's a bit weird. You still get the 2 lands, and they do come in untapped, but the second one comes in later. So, you know, I don't know. It can be good, but it does depend. There are certain decks that I would think that it does go in, but it doesn't certainly go in every deck because, again, you want most of your ramp to be early and cheap and efficient. You don't want these spells, but in Omnath decks, in landfall decks, you might want something like this because you get 2 lands out of it. But then is like Harrow or Rolling Regrowth just better because it's instant speed. You get both the lands at the same time. It's 3 mana instead of 4. Yeah, sure, you've got to sack a land or whatnot, but that's not that big of a deal, really. So I just don't know. I don't think that this is quite as good as some of those, but I think it is better than Explosive Veggies. I don't know if it's better than some of the other Explosive Veggies reprints stroke upgrades that we've gotten in the last few years, but again, they do come in untapped, so most of those other cards don't do that. But again, you've got to wait for the second land, so I don't know. It's hard to say. In certain decks, maybe I would consider it. That's all. I would just consider it in certain decks if you really want to make the most out of getting more and more lands out of your deck. Next one, Timeless Witness. 4 mana, 2/1. When it ETBs, you return target card from your graveyard to your hand, and it has Eternalize for 5 and double green. Look, Eternalize, it's just gravy. Don't worry about eternalizing it. You can find other things that will reanimate this or will get it back or whatnot and things like that. Eternalize is the bottom of the barrel thing that you're going to do if you really absolutely need something back from your graveyard to your hand. You're mostly going to get an instant or sorcery or whatnot, but it's good to get back anything that you do need at the time that you need it. Again, this is, you know, Eternal Witness on steroids. It is very good, and I do think that it can see some play in most commander decks because, you know, just having another Eternal Witness is pretty good, especially if you're in a graveyard stroke reanimator deck. This is really good. Again, you're not going to get that Eternalize very much, but sometimes you will. And again, you can just get this back from your graveyard with other effects to get back the spells that you actually need and whatnot to keep progressing what you're doing. So I definitely think it will see some play. Next, Tireless Provisioner, 2 and a green, 3/2, which is some weird stats. It has landfall. When a land ETB is under your control, you can create a food or a treasure token. So it's a, you know, it's a thing that makes food, which I don't think that there's ever been anything that makes food. But it's Lotus Cobra, essentially, but, you know, it makes a treasure instead of giving you a floating mana. So that's pretty good. Like, Lotus Cobra is a very strong and played card. The thing about Lotus Cobra is sometimes you don't want to, like, use that mana or can't use that mana straight away, so it sort of fizzles. And that's kind of a little bit annoying sometimes. So even though this is 1 more mana, like, even, like, the food, like, I don't see you making that much food with this. Maybe if you're under a lot of pressure and you really need to gain some life, you might make them. I don't know. It doesn't seem very likely. But again, it is there and it's additional text to this creature, but just that this makes treasures whenever you play land, it automatically ramps you, and it's something that you're probably going to sacrifice very quickly in the next few turns. It's not going to just sit around for too long. So it's one of those artifacts that you just don't really care about, that even if it gets blown up or whatever, you're not that worried, because you've already got your value mostly out of what this is doing for the most part. Even if you use a few treasures here and there, and then, a few other treasures get blown up later, you might not care, because again, you've gotten that value out of it and you can still keep making treasures with it. So it's just one of those things where I don't think there's any downside to this. It does depend on what your deck is and what your deck's doing. Specifically, maybe just like landfall.deck will use it because it's another really good landfall card where you can sort of store up your mana for a couple of turns and then sort of storm off on the next few turns. That's again the problem with Lotus Cobra, is that if you don't have the mana to cast the things that you actually need to cast now, you just sort of fizzle more mana, and this will help you store more mana so that you can have more mana on a later turn to, go off or whatnot and whatever else, so that, you can advance yourself and potentially win the game and get really far ahead. So it is one of those things, but again, I don't know. Again, there are other decks that might want to use it, but again, I would consider what your deck is specifically doing, if it can utilize these treasures for the most part. And again, maybe if you're food tribal, if you're hard up on making food and you really want something to make food for you, you might consider the other half of it. Next one up, and the last one in green here, is Chatterstorm. 1 and a green sorcery. It is a storm card. You create a 1/1 green squirrel token. So, I don't know how many cards there are that have storm that make squirrels, or that you can storm off with to make squirrels or whatnot. But, there might be a few. Like if you're a spell deck, maybe you want this, but then again, I don't know, it's just not the best card. Like again, if you're squirrel tribal, like I am, yeah, I think it's a good card, but again, it actually is quite interesting, and you can do some shenanigans with it if you can find the right place to play it. It is a sorcery, of course. You can't do it in reaction to somebody else, like casting 50 things or whatnot, whatever. But again, if you can give it flash, then of course you can, but that's another build around. But again, there are things that you can do with it in certain decks, so I would consider it in certain decks, but it is a very fringe card for the most part, in my opinion. But again, I just want to talk about it because it's a squirrel card. So, anyway, that's all I've got for green right now. And there are a couple of lands here in the set that I want to quickly go over. So we'll quickly have a look at some of the lands for the set. First off, we've got Ursus Saga. This is a weird land. So first you get this enchantment that's basically a land that taps for waste mana or colorless mana, basically. Then Law counter 2 goes on. So it gains the ability to pay 2, tap it, create a 0/0 colorless construct artifact creature token with it gets +1/+1 for each artifact you control. So, initially, if you don't have any artifacts, you get a 1/1. If you can, on the third law counter before you sacrifice it, you can also pay the 2. You can create another one, which will be a 2/2, and will also make the first one a 2/2. Then you sacrifice this thing on the third law counter. Go search your library for an artifact card with mana value or CMC of 0 or 1. Put it into the battlefield and then shuffle your library. Just a free tutor to go get your Soul Ring. Yeah, sure, it basically gives your Soul Ring suspend for 3 to a degree, but that's okay, or whatever. If you want to go get your, you know, mana crypt or whatever, mana vault or whatever, any of your cheap mana rocks, this will tutor it out for you. So it's really good and really powerful in that sense. It is a 3-turn, I will get my best mana rock out or whatever, or I can get Skull Clamp out or whatnot, whatever I need. So you could run a whole bunch of utility 1 mana stroke 0 mana artifacts just to sort of hit with this. I think it's pretty good, to be honest. Like, I think that this can see a lot of play. It just does depend, because again, in 4-color decks and above, I don't know whether you can justify playing this, because it's like, well, how do I fit this in? Because I have so much other stuff going on in this deck once you're in 4 or 5 colors, that how can I justify this colorless land, even though it tutors me my Soul Ring, whatever, you know, Mana Crypt, Mana Vault, whatever. That is really hard. So it is like hard to just go, this is what you do with it, or whatnot, whatever. So it is difficult to figure out where you exactly put it in a way in those higher color decks. But in, like, I don't know whether you play it in 3-color decks, it depends what the deck is. But again, like, maybe there are some decks that want it, and there are certainly some decks that would mind the artifact constructs, like Bruticlad and whatnot. So I think this shines the best in, like, 2-color decks that are not in green, and maybe some 3-color decks that are not paired with green. So maybe in some of those decks, maybe Breya, maybe, possibly, if it's not a CDH build, because I think that even though this comes in untapped, the fact that it's a colorless land in that deck just means that you probably can't realistically afford to run it, because it's just too much of a, you know, colorless problem in your deck that you need the fixing for your deck. So I just don't see that this is going to go in, even though it can tutor up, you know, one of your best, you know, fast mana rocks in those decks. So it's hard to say. Certainly colorless decks 100% of the time. Maybe in, like, Boros decks would really want this, because they, even though you're going down a land, you're getting your Soul Ring or whatnot, so at least you're going up mana. And that's a lot of the problem with those decks, is just like getting started, getting going. You know, once you establish your mana and you can actually, like, play things, you're okay. But that's just getting to the point and getting to the problem of a lot of those decks, is that they just have the problem of getting mana and then getting on the board so that they can actually start enacting their plan. It becomes later and later on that they just suddenly stumble and will find 70, 80 lands in a row or whatever, after getting board wiped and whatever else. So that's their other problem. But then again, I don't know how they can fix that. But again, I think this card certainly will see a lot of play in a lot of decks. Some people will try and run it greedily, perhaps, and then get punished, you know. But again, you know, I still think it's a really good card, and it will see a lot of play. Next, Yavimaya, Cradle of Growth. It's basically a green version of Urborg, so each land is a forest in addition to its other types. So this is quite a good one. I would run it in every single one of my decks that contains green. And why? Even if there's not that many effects that sort of work with you having forests or your opponents having forests, it's just another forest in your deck. So what's the difference between having this and having a forest to a degree? If you're in 2 or more colors, it makes it a lot more different, because then every single one of the other lands that you're playing is essentially now, you know, like if you play a Plains, it's now, you know, not Bayou, whatever it is, it's now Savannah or whatever it is. It's a dual land, and it has both the land types, essentially. If you have this and Urborg out, even if you don't have the Urborg out, now every one of your lands is a tri-land. That is pretty darn ridiculous and pretty darn good, especially for fixing purposes. So if you play a land that isn't, you know, it is like Overgrown Tomb, not Overgrown Tomb, Godless Shrine or whatever, suddenly you've got a tri-land, and your Godless Shrine can tap for green, you know, and it's also a land that, you know, helps fix you for your other colours as well. So, you know, if I'm in a green deck, I'm just going to find a basic forest somewhere in my deck, take it out, put this thing in, because it's really going to help my mana base so much, because it's going to turn all of my single color lands that aren't forests into dual lands. It's going to turn all of my dual lands that aren't forests into tri-lands. So that's just really good, and it's going to turn on Forest Walk sometimes. That is somewhat relevant with some things and whatnot. So I would definitely run this in every single one of my green decks. I would even run this in 5-color, because again, it makes all of your lands tap for an additional color. I would probably run Urborg as well if you're in that sort of deck that you can just go, well, I might as well run it. It makes all of my lands, you know, another type, meaning they can tap for another color. Next, an artifact land, and there's some more artifact lands to come. Power Depot or Depot. It enters the battlefield tapped, taps for a color, so you can tap it to add 1 mana of any color. Spend this mana only to cast artifact spells or activate abilities of artifacts, and has modular 1. Okay, so colorless decks, this is the land for you, I would say, for the most part. It's not that great, it's not amazing. It does come in with a counter, and if you care about modular or you care about using that counter in a way, it can be good. It is an artifact in addition to its other types, so that can be useful in certain situations. Maybe certain artifact decks that want this level of fixing and maybe want to care about artifact lands. The new Boros or Lorehold legendary commander from Commander Precon Osgear, he might want this. There's a few other ones. Breya, maybe, if it's a cheaper, more casual sort of build, might want this. So there's certainly some place for it. Just okay in certain decks. And last but not least, all of the artifact land duels, I'm not going to go through them and name them all. It's all 10 of them. Oh my god, Wizards, they've actually done it. They've actually created a full cycle. Well done, Wizards. Well done. You finally created a full cycle in one set and not left any of them out and had to print them later or whatnot, whatever. You know, well done. You finally figured it out and done it. Great. Excellent. All of these are artifact lands. They're in every color pair. So again, like the green ones, I am 98% that no one will have them see play pretty much ever. Maybe the Golgari one, because there's that one really weird Golgari Gliss of the Trader deck that revolves around artifacts, but that's pretty much the only artifact deck that's in green that I know of. So none of these other ones will probably see much play. They come into play tapped. They're indestructible, which is a slight upside, but that's not that relevant. I think the Boros one, or the Lorehold one now, maybe, whatever they want to call it, is maybe the most interesting one to a degree because of the new Boros Lorehold Commander that came out, as I was just saying. That one probably will go into that deck and, you know, slot in quite well. you know, a lot of the other colours, as I say, they might see play. Depends on how budget your deck is and how you can afford to put this in. I would think if you can discard them and, you know, like the new Lorehold command, basically exile and create token copies of them, then I think that they're all right. But again, they are artifacts, so they do get got by some forms of artifact hate, being like things that say artifacts can't tap and whatnot. They don't get got by things that say destroy all artifacts, because again, they're indestructible. But again, they do get got by things like, you know, that say activated abilities and whatnot of artifacts can't be activated, and mana ability is an activated ability, so they can't tap for mana essentially when those effects are out and whatnot. So just keep that in mind. But again, I would think that mostly if you're in a 2-color pair and you're on a budget and you really care about artifacts, especially artifact lands, or you like are a bit worried about your artifact, or you're a bit worried about your lands being blown up, maybe, I don't know, that doesn't really happen that much. But again, if you're a bit worried about that, maybe you can run them in your deck and they'll just be okay. You know, just coming into play tap, they're a little bit slow, but that's not a huge thing too much. So I would think about running them if you're in an artifact deck and can really care about, you know, what they're doing and what they're giving you. Anyway, guys, that is pretty much it for this video. Again, you know, good one here where, you know, we had quite a few things in this set to have a look at and have a chat about from this color pair and from lands and whatnot. The last video will be coming out fairly soon. As soon as I can get it ready and finished and whatnot, I'll be putting it out for you guys. So, you know, let me know what you think about these cards in the comments down below. And I'll be bringing you the next one as soon as I can, which will be multicolored and colorless cards. Please remember that the success of channels like this is based on viewers like you, so please consider liking, sharing, and subscribing if you would like to support this content. You can also get social with us on our Discord and on our Facebook. If you would like to further support the channel, you can go onto our Patreon. All links are in the description. Thank you for your support. It really means a lot. I hope you have enjoyed this video here today, and if you have, I hope you will come back for another one. See you then.